The axe rose and fell in the dark. Snow had begun to fall. Not soft, but driven sideways by a wind that already knew the mountain's temper. It clung to the scar on his face and melted there. He did not slow. The woodpile grew beside him, higher than any single winter could ever need, each log stacked with the same deliberate violence he used to keep from thinking. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned low. The second chair at the table remained empty. It had remained empty for 7 years. He split wood, because stopping meant listening to the sound of wagon wheels turning away down the mountain road. 5 times. 5 departures. Each one quieter than the last. In a schoolroom in Ohio, a woman read a newspaper by lamplight. She read the words a man had once written about himself. Large and not handsome, steady, honest, will not waste your time. And she did not laugh. She folded the paper carefully. The mountain waited. The town of Caldwell, Montana had exactly one street worth naming. Main Street, because no one felt the need to be creative about it. There was a general store, a blacksmith, a church with a crooked steeple that leaned slightly east, as if it had been trying to look at something down the road for the past 20 years and had finally given up. There was a post office run by a man named Gerald, who read every letter that passed through his hands and considered this a public service rather than a crime. And there was Reverend Silas Drum, 68 years old. White hair the color of January snow, hands that had held more grief than most people accumulate in 3 lifetimes. He had been the minister of Caldwell's only church since 1851. He had buried children and fathers and a woman who died on her wedding day, and a man who died laughing at his own joke, which Silas had always considered the most dignified exit he'd ever witnessed. He knew this town the way you know, the back of your own hand, every scar, every crooked line, every part that didn't heal quite right, and he knew Hector Vane better than anyone in Caldwell, better than anyone in Montana. Better probably than Hector knew himself, which wasn't saying much, because Hector Vane had spent the better part of 7 years actively avoiding self-knowledge. Let's start with the facts. Because facts are easier than the truth, and with Hector, people always started with facts. Fact. Hector Vane was 6 feet and 8 inches tall. Fact. He weighed 290 pounds. Fact. His hands were the size of small shovels. His shoulders filled a doorframe, the way furniture fills a room. Not because they were meant to, but because there was simply no other option. Fact. There was a scar that ran from his left temple down across his cheekbone to the corner of his jaw, long, deep. The kind of scar that changes the geography of a face permanently, that makes strangers look and then look away, that causes children to press themselves against their mother's legs at the general store without fully understanding why. The scar came from 1868, a logging accident, a chain that snapped under pressure and came back the wrong direction and introduced itself to the left side of Hector's face without his permission. He had been 39. He had stitched it himself with a needle and thread. He boiled in creek water in the cabin on Black Ridge Mountain, alone because the nearest doctor was 2 hours down a road that became a river in spring. He had not cried during the stitching. He had, however, broken his second-best chair afterward, which told you everything you needed to know about Hector Vane. The man could endure almost anything. It was the almost that caused problems. He came down from Black Ridge 4 times, Sawyer Spring, for seeds and new rope and whatever books had arrived at Gerald's store from the eastern distributors. Summer for flour and salt, and the particular brand of axle grease that kept his wagon from sounding like a dying animal on the mountain road. Autumn for winter supplies. This was the longest trip, the most necessary winter. Once, briefly, because Silas Drum sent word that something needed attending to, and Hector trusted Silas in the way you trust the one person who has never lied to you about anything important. Each trip followed the same pattern. Hector arrived at dawn when the street was mostly empty. He tied his horse at the rail outside the general store. He went in. He handed his list to whoever was behind the counter, which changed every few years because young men in general stores tended to find better options eventually. He paid exactly what was asked. He did not negotiate. He did not make small talk. He carried his supplies to the wagon himself, which saved considerable time since no one else could lift what he was lifting without considerable cooperation. Then he left. The whole transaction took perhaps 40 minutes. The stories about him lasted considerably longer. You have to understand something about small towns. They are not cruel, exactly. They are just very, very bored. And a 6'8" man with a scarred face who lived alone on a mountain and came down 4 times a year and never smiled and bought more books than a schoolteacher was, objectively, the most interesting thing Caldwell had to offer. So the stories grew, the way stories do when no one has enough information to fill the space, but too much imagination to leave it empty. The children said Hector Vane had fought a bear and won. The bear had given him that scar. The bear had lost considerably more. This story was considered exciting and largely plausible. The women at the Tuesday sewing circle said he had a wife once, hidden away up there, and that was why he needed so much flour. The disappearance of this hypothetical wife was explained in increasingly dramatic ways, depending on who was telling the story and how long the meeting had been running. The men at the saloon said he had killed someone once, with his bare hands, for unclear reasons. This story was told with more admiration than horror, which said something about the saloon and the men in it. None of these stories were true. The truth was considerably quieter, and considerably sadder, and not the kind of thing that makes for good telling at a saloon. Silas Drum knew the truth. He knew it because he was the only person in Caldwell who had ever climbed Black Ridge Mountain to visit Hector Vane and been permitted to stay for more than the time it takes to deliver a message. The first time he climbed, it was 1866, a year after Hector had arrived on the mountain. Silas had heard about the man from a timber hauler who said there was a giant living up in the pines, building a cabin with his bare hands and talking to no one. Silas was the kind of minister who believed that talking to no one was a spiritual emergency. He climbed. He knocked on the half-finished door of a half-finished cabin. Hector had opened it, looked down at the small white-haired preacher on his doorstep, and said nothing. Silas had said, "I brought bread." Hector had said nothing. Silas had said, "My wife baked it. She is an excellent baker, and she would be insulted if I brought it back." A very long pause, then Hector had stepped aside. They had sat at the rough-hewn table in the half-finished cabin and eaten bread and said almost nothing for 2 hours. At the end, Silas had stood to leave, and Hector had said, without looking up from the table, "Same time next month." It was not a question, so Silas came back the next month. And the month after, for 7 years, he watched the cabin grow from 1 room to 3. He watched the bookshelf fill. He watched Hector plant flowers along the fence line. Wildflowers, the kind his mother had kept in a tin can on the windowsill when he was a boy in Pennsylvania, and then pretend, when Silas asked about them, that they had simply grown there on their own. Silas did not push. He had learned across 68 years and 3 decades of ministry that some truths needed to arrive on their own schedule. And then there was the winter of 1869, December. A flood had come through in October, the worst in 20 years, and it had taken the eastern wall of Caldwell's church with it. Just the one wall. But one wall is enough. The building became unusable. The congregation held services in the general store, which smelled of tobacco and axle grease, and made the hymns sound considerably less holy than intended. A collection was taken. Enough for materials, perhaps, if the materials were modest and the labor was volunteered. Plans were discussed. Arguments were had about whether the new wall should match the original, or improve upon it, and these arguments continued through November without resolution. Because that is what happens when you ask 15 people to agree on a wall. On the morning of December 3rd, Silas walked to the church at first light to make sure nothing further had deteriorated overnight. The wall was there, not the old wall, a new wall, better than the old one. Properly framed, properly sealed, with a small carved detail along the top edge. Nothing ornate, just a simple line of notched wood. that he did not recognize from any design discussed at any meeting. He stood in front of it for a long time. In the mud at his feet, pressed deep by something very heavy, was a single boot print. Enormous. Pointing away from the church and north, toward the mountain road, Silas put his hand on the new wall, felt the weight of it, the care in it, the quality of something, built by a person who wanted it to last. He did not tell anyone who had built it, not because he was protecting Hector, but because he understood, instinctively, that Hector had not done it to be known. He had done it because it needed doing, and he had done it at night, and he had gone back up the mountain before the town woke up. There is a kind of goodness that does not want to be seen. Silas had been a minister for 30 years. He did not encounter it often. When he did, he treated it the way you treat something rare and fragile. With care, with silence, with the understanding that naming it too loudly might startle it away. Now we come to the letters. Spring of 1871, Hector Vane wrote his first advertisement for a correspondence marriage service. It took him 4 attempts. The first 3 were too long. He kept explaining things that didn't need explaining, and then explaining why he'd explained them. Which is what happens when you are a man who thinks in great detail but speaks almost never, and has therefore accumulated considerable unexpressed thought that tends to come out all at once in inappropriate volumes. The 4th attempt was shorter. He wrote it standing at his kitchen table at midnight, by lamplight, because he had not been sleeping well. He was 42 years old. He had built a cabin that had become, over 14 years, something substantial and warm. 3 rooms, a stone fireplace, a porch that faced the valley, a bookshelf that ran along an entire wall and was running out of room. He had flowers along the fence that he did not talk about. He had horses he talked to more than he intended, and he had sunsets. Every evening. Colors that made his chest ache in a way he could not fully articulate and had stopped trying to. Purple and copper and a particular shade of gold that only existed in that valley at that hour and had no name he knew of. He watched them alone. He was tired of watching them alone. He was not a man who admitted things easily. But he was also not a man who lied to himself without cause. And the truth was simple enough. He was lonely in a way that had weight to it. Real, physical weight. The kind you carry between your shoulder blades. The advertisement read, in its final form, man, age 42, residing on Black Ridge Mountain, Montana Territory. Cabin built, wood cut, food stored, no debt, honest work. Looking for a woman who wants a quiet life and is not frightened of weather or silence. I am large and not handsome. I will not pretend otherwise. But I am steady, and I do not lie, and I will not waste your time. Write to Caldwell Post Office, Box 7, Montana Territory. Gerald at the post office read it before sending it, because Gerald read everything. He looked at Hector over the counter and said, "You sure you want to include that part about not being handsome?" Hector said, "It's accurate." Gerald sent it. The first bride arrived in April. Her name was Dorinda Fay. She was from St. Louis. She had written 3 letters, and Hector had written 3 letters back. And they had managed to establish, through this correspondence, that she liked gardens and he had a fence, and that she could cook and he ate mostly things that did not require cooking, and that she was willing to try something new. What she had not been willing to try, it turned out, was Hector, not Hector the person. Hector the apparition. He had been in the barn when the wagon arrived, working. He came out into the afternoon light, still holding an axe because he had been splitting kindling and had not thought to put it down, which, in retrospect, was a significant oversight. Dorinda Fay saw 6 feet and 8 inches of scarred, axe-holding mountain man step out of a dark barn directly into her field of vision, and she made a sound, a very small sound, barely audible, and then she was back in the wagon, not in a dramatic way, not with screaming or tears. She simply reversed her decision to be there with the calm efficiency of a woman who had weighed her options and reached a conclusion. "I'm sorry," she said to the driver. "We should go back." She didn't look at Hector again. He stood in the yard with the axe and watched the wagon go back down the mountain road. And then he put the axe down and went back into the barn and finished splitting the kindling because the kindling still needed splitting regardless. He did not write about it in his journal that night. Some things didn't need to be written. They just needed to be gotten through. The second bride was Mabel Thorne. From Cincinnati, she was braver than Dorinda. Or perhaps she had simply prepared herself more thoroughly. She had seen Hector and she had not fled. She had stood on the porch of her Cincinnati apartment and told herself, "You can do this." And she had believed herself. For 4 days, not because of Hector. Exactly, Mabel would say later, in letters to her sister, that Hector himself was, and she used this word carefully, fine. He was quiet. He was not unkind. He did not frighten her. What frightened her was everything else. The silence of the mountain at night. Not the comfortable silence of a city apartment, with the distant sounds of life filtering through the walls. The silence of a place where there was genuinely nothing between you and the dark, where the wind moved through the pines in a way that sometimes, like breathing, where the nearest other human being was 2 hours away on a road that turned to mud and rain. She cried each evening and each morning, and sometimes in the middle of the day, for no specific reason she could name, except that the world suddenly felt very, very large and very, very empty, and she was in the middle of it, and there was no way to make it smaller. On the fourth morning, she asked Hector when the next wagon came through. He said, "Tomorrow," she said, "I'll be ready." He drove her down himself. The trip took 2 hours. They did not speak. When they reached Caldwell, she said, "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't be." She got down from the wagon and walked to the post office to arrange her passage east, and Hector watched her go, and then turned the wagon back toward the mountain. Silas was standing outside the church. He did not say anything. Hector did not say anything. The wagon went past. The sound of it faded up the mountain road. Silas went back inside the church and sat in the front pew for a while. In the quiet that comes after someone has been hurt and has decided not to show it, he prayed for Hector Vane, not for a wife to stay, just for the man himself, for whatever was underneath all that mountain and silence and stubborn, enduring quiet. The third bride was Louisa Pemberton. And Louisa was different. She came from Philadelphia. She was 34 years old, and she had intelligent eyes and the posture of a woman who had made up her mind about something and was not interested in being talked out of it. She had read Hector's advertisement twice. She had written him a letter that was nothing like the others. Not about herself. About the mountains. She had never seen mountains. She wanted to. When she arrived and saw Hector, really saw him, the full height, the scar, the hands, she went a little still. But she did not go backward. She looked at him for a long moment. The way you look at something you need to understand before you respond to it. Then she said, "Those are bigger mountains than I expected," he said. "Yes," she said. "And you're bigger than your advertisement suggested," he said. "I said I was large," she said. "Large is a relative term, Mr. Vane." It was not a criticism. It was an observation. And somehow that distinction made all the difference. She stayed 6 days, longer than anyone. She walked the mountain paths with him in the early mornings and asked questions, real questions, the kind that require thought before answering. About the trees, the weather, the way the valley changed with the light. She sat on the porch in the evenings and watched the sunset with the focused attention of a person experiencing something they had only read about before. On the fifth evening, she laughed at something he said. He had not been trying to be funny, but she laughed anyway, and the sound of it caught him somewhere in the chest and stayed there longer than it should have. On the sixth morning, she was gone. No warning. No conversation the night before. Her things were simply not there. When he went to build the morning fire, and the porch was empty, and he heard the sound of a wagon on the lower road that had already passed the point where it could be seen from the cabin, he searched the cabin. Methodically, the way he approached most things. Under the pillow in the guest room, he found a small folded piece of paper. He stood at the window and read it. She had written, "I am not afraid of you." That surprised me. I am afraid of myself, afraid that I am staying for the... I need to be rescued. I can feel it in the way I look at you. And you deserve more than someone who mistakes a rescuer for a partner. I am sorry. You are more than your advertisement, Mr. Vane. I hope you find someone who comes to you whole. He read it twice. He folded it back up. He put it in the inside pocket of his winter coat, where he kept things he was not ready to examine, but could not throw away. He did not understand everything she had written, but he understood enough to know it was honest. And honest things, even painful ones, deserved to be kept. The fourth bride arrived in May of 1872, and she was not technically a bride at all. She was a journalist. Her name was Philippa Greer. She worked for the Columbus Ledger, a small regional paper with decent circulation, and a Thursday column called Frontier Curiosities that specialized in the particular brand of Western oddity that Eastern readers found entertaining from a safe distance. She had seen Hector's advertisement reprinted in a traveling gazette. These things happened. Correspondence, service notices, drifted across papers the way seeds drift on wind, and she had not seen a lonely man seeking a wife. She had seen a story, a good one, The Beast of Blackridge, a bachelor too wild to wed. She had written up a proposal. Her editor had approved it. She had created a correspondence identity, a woman named Constance, from Toledo. And she had written Hector 3 letters that were just genuine enough to be convincing and just vague enough to avoid specific commitment. She was good at her job. The job, in this case, being fraud. She arrived with a notepad tucked into the lining of her travel bag, a small pencil she kept behind her ear, under her bonnet, and the professional confidence of a woman who had talked her way through considerable awkward situations and expected this to be another one. What she had not prepared for was the cabin, or the books, or the fact that when she asked Hector, within the first 2 hours, because she was efficient, what he did in the evenings, he said, "Read, mostly," and gestured at the wall, and the wall was full. Not a decorative collection, not the kind of books people bought to look educated. These were red books. Spines cracked and rebent, pages marked with strips of bark and folded corners. Margins. She could see this when he turned his back for a moment, and she leaned close. Margins full of his handwriting, small and dense and running in every direction. She had expected a story about loneliness and wildness and the uncivilized frontier. She was getting something more complicated, but she had a deadline, and her editor was expecting The Beast of Blackridge. And so she took her notes. In the evenings, after Hector had gone to bed, and she told herself that complicated was still interesting, and interesting was still worth printing. On the third day, she left her travel bag on the porch railing while she walked to the creek. Hector moved it when he went past. Because it was in the way, the lining was loose. Old seam, the notepad slipped out onto the porch boards. He stood at the porch railing and looked at it. He did not pick it up immediately. He just looked. At the neat handwriting on the open page. At his name in the middle of a sentence. At the words surrounding it, he read enough. He did not need to read all of it. When Philippa came back from the creek, Hector was sitting on the porch steps. The notepad was on the railing where the bag had been. Closed. Placed with a care that was worse than anger, somehow. The careful placement of something returned. He looked at her for a moment without speaking then. How long until the next wall comes through? She understood immediately. She was a journalist. She understood subtext. Tomorrow, she said. Early. I'll drive you down. That was all he said. That evening he sat at the kitchen table, with a book open in front of him that he did not read. He sat very still for a long time, and then he got up, went outside, and began splitting wood. He split wood for 3 hours. The pile he built that night would have lasted most men 2 winters. Silas came up the following week. He saw the wood pile. He did not say anything about it. He sat at the kitchen table, and Hector made coffee, badly, the way he always did. They drank it. The silence between them was of the familiar variety, the kind that doesn't need filling. Then Silas said, "Gerald tells me there was a piece in the Columbus paper," Hector said. "Yes, about you? Yes. Did you read it? A pause. Yes. Silas turned his coffee cup in his hands. An old habit, and… Hector looked out the window for a moment. At the tree line. At the gray green of pine in early morning light. It wasn't wrong, he said finally. About the facts. Facts aren't the same as truth, Silas said. No, Hector agreed. They're not. That was the end of the conversation. But Silas noticed when he left that afternoon that there was a new notch in the cabin's door frame. Low, where a man might rest his hand. Something to hold on to when the entry felt too narrow. He filed it away. The way he filed everything about Hector. In the category of things that would eventually make sense if he waited long enough. The fifth bride arrived in September. Her name was Agatha Blunt. And she was from Western Massachusetts, and she was, Hector would say later, in the closest thing to a compliment he'd managed across 5 attempts. The most straightforwardly decent of the 5. She came with good intentions, real ones. She had read the advertisement and responded because she was 31 years old and capable and genuinely interested in frontier life and had no illusions about what she was walking into. She was not frightened of Hector. She was not frightened of the mountain. She was, in the end, frightened of the life. Not the life he had, specifically, just the life. The particular flavor of isolation that came from being 2 hours from any other person when a thing went wrong. The understanding, after 3 days, that wrong things went wrong here regularly. The weather, the road, the equipment, the endless small emergencies of living, far from any help. And that the skill required to manage them was not something you arrived with. It was something you built over years. Years she wasn't sure she had, before she left, and she told him she was leaving. Which Hector respected. The fact that she said it to his face rather than while his back was turned. She said, "You're not frightening, Mr. Vane. You never were. But this life of yours takes a kind of courage I don't have yet." "Maybe someday," Hector said. "I understand," she said. "I hope you find someone who already has it." He drove her down the mountain. They did not speak much. When she got down from the wagon in Caldwell, she turned and looked up at him. "I'm sorry," she said. He said, "Don't be. You were honest. That's worth more than you think." He watched her walk away, then he drove back up. The winter of 1872 was long. Hector did not write any more letters. He packed away the correspondence papers, put them in the chest under his bed, where he kept things he was not ready to throw away, but didn't need to look at. He returned to his routine. Wood, water, horses, books. Sunsets watched alone from the porch in the cold, his breath making small clouds that drifted out over the valley and disappeared. He was not angry. That would have been easier. He was something more difficult to name, a kind of settling. The way stone settles into a riverbed, not giving up, exactly, just finding the position where the current pushes against you least. He had tried 5 times. He had failed 5 times. The mathematics were clear enough. The problem was him, his face or his size or his life, or some combination of the 3, that added up to something a woman could not stay beside for longer than a week. He had begun to believe it, not as a self-pitying thing. As a practical conclusion, he turned 43 in November. He sat at the kitchen table and did not think about that particularly. He made himself dinner, he read. He went to bed at the usual time. The night was very quiet. He lay in the dark, listening to the wind move through the pines outside his window, and did what he had trained himself not to do, which was listen to the silence of the other side of the bed. The unoccupied weight of it. The way a room feels different at 3 in the morning, when there is no one else breathing in it. He was good at most things. He was not good at this. In January of 1873, in a schoolroom in Columbus, Ohio, a woman named Wren Alcott was sitting at her desk waiting for her students to arrive when a colleague named Patricia dropped a folded newspaper on her desk. "Read the middle section," Patricia said. "Page 4, Frontier Curiosities column. It'll cheer you up." Wren looked at her. Patricia was the kind of person who found other people's misfortunes cheering in the harmless, communal way that made her good company at supper, and occasionally difficult at funerals. Wren unfolded the paper. The Beast of Blackridge, a bachelor too wild to wed. She read it. It was well written, she noted. Philippa Greer had real skill with language. The details were specific, and the pacing was good, and the portrait it painted was of something between a folk legend and a circus attraction. A mountain man too large and too strange for ordinary life. Seeking ordinary wives who fled at the sight of him, an irresistible comedy for the Eastern reader, who would never have to meet him. The room around her had filled in while she read. Other teachers arriving. Coats hung. Coffee poured. Someone was saying something funny about the superintendent, and everyone was laughing. Wren was not laughing. She was reading the passage near the end, where Philippa quoted from Hector's original advertisement. Large and not handsome. I will not pretend otherwise. But I am steady and I do not lie. She read that part 3 times. Then she read, I will not waste your time, and she thought, this is a person trying to tell the truth in a world that is treating his truth as a punchline. She folded the paper, carefully. The way you fold something you intend to keep. Patricia looked over. Well, isn't it funny? Wren said. It's something. She put the paper in her bag. She taught her classes. She ate her lunch. She walked home through the cold January streets of Columbus and thought about nothing else the entire time. Wren Alcott was 32 years old. She had been a teacher for 9 years. She was good at it, in the way that people are good at things they genuinely love. Not perfectly, not without struggle, but with the kind of deep attention that makes students feel, somehow, that what they are learning matters. She had been a wife for 3 years. Also good at that. Also, with attention and care, and the investment of someone who takes commitments seriously. And then Thomas had gotten sick in the autumn of 1865 and died in the spring of 1866. And she had been a widow for 7 years. Which she was not good at, not because she was weak, but because she had never quite accepted it as a permanent condition. She kept not accepting it, year after year, in the quiet, stubborn way of someone who knows what they know and cannot be argued out of it, what she knew. She was not meant for the life of a woman alone, not because she couldn't manage it. She managed it fine. She had her work and her books and her small house on Harding Street with the garden she kept herself and the cat named Kepler, who was more philosophical than affectionate, but was at least consistently present. She managed. But managing was not the same as living. And she knew that too. She sat at her kitchen table that evening with a fresh sheet of paper. She did not write to the correspondence service. She had looked up the address in the advertisement, but the service had no record of Hector Vane. She would find out later that he had canceled his subscription in the autumn. So she wrote instead to the post office in Caldwell, Montana, and addressed it to a Reverend Silastrom, whose name had appeared once in the Ledger article, as a local minister who had known the subject. She wrote, Dear Reverend Drum, I have read the article about Mr. Hector Vane in the Columbus Ledger. I understand this may seem a peculiar way to begin. I am a school teacher, 32 years old, widowed, from Columbus, Ohio. I am not writing because the article amused me. I am writing because I read a line from Mr. Vane's own advertisement, and I thought, this is a person who is trying to tell the truth. I have been looking for that for some time. If you know Mr. Vane and trust him, as the article suggests you do, I would ask only this. Would you forward the enclosed letter to him? If he does not respond, I will understand, but I would rather ask and be refused than not ask at all. The enclosed letter is for Mr. Vane alone, respectfully. Wren Alcott. The enclosed letter said, Mr. Vane, I read a piece about you that was trying to be funny. I don't think your life is funny. I think it is hard and specific and built by someone who knows what they want, even if they haven't found it yet. I am a teacher. I have learned to read people through what they choose to say and what they choose to leave out. Your advertisement said you were steady and honest and wouldn't waste my time. That is more than most men offer. I have one question. What are you reading right now? If you want to answer, I'll be at this address until June. Wren Alcott, 14 Harding Street, Columbus, Ohio. She sealed the envelopes. She put them in her bag. She mailed them the next morning on the way to school. She did not expect an answer quickly. She told herself she might not get one at all. She went back to her students and her books and her small house, and Kepler the philosophical cat, and she waited in the way of people who have learned to wait without it becoming hope. Careful, quiet, eyes open. The letter took 3 weeks to reach Silas. Gerald at the post office handed it to him on a Tuesday with an expression that communicated several things at once, primary among them the fact that he had read it. Silas walked up Black Ridge Mountain the following Saturday. He found Hector in the barn, as usual, working, as usual. He came out when he heard the sound of footsteps, and he looked at Silas, and then at the envelope Silas was holding, and his face did the particular closed thing it did when something was happening that he had not prepared himself for. "Who is it from?" Hector said. "A woman in Ohio," Silas said. "I think you should read it. I'm not doing that anymore," Hector said, and turned back toward the barn. "Hector," Silas did not raise his voice. He never needed to. There was something in his tone, some quality of patient, immovable conviction that worked better than volume. Hector stopped. "The last one wrote an article about you for a newspaper," Silas said. "This one read that article and wrote to me to ask if I would forward her letter to you, because she thought the article had it wrong." Those are two very different responses to the same material. A long silence. The wind moved through the pines. Hector turned around. He looked at the envelope in Silas's hand. He crossed the yard in 4 strides. Silas always had to recalibrate his sense of distance when Hector moved, because the strides covered so much ground, and took it. He looked at the handwriting on the outside. Neat. Deliberate. Each letter placed as if it had been thought about. "I'll be in the cabin," he said. Silas sat on the porch and looked at the valley. It took Hector a long time to come back out. When he did, he was holding both letters, Wren's and Silas's, and his expression had done something new, something Silas had not seen in 7 years of monthly visits. It wasn't quite hope, but it was adjacent to it. She asked, "What I'm reading," Hector said. Silas said, "What are you reading, Thoreau?" "Walden and—" Hector looked at the letters again, then at the valley, then back at Silas. "I need paper," he said. Silas reached into his coat pocket and produced a folded sheet. He had brought it. He had not mentioned he was bringing it. He had simply known. Hector took it. He went back inside. Silas sat on the porch for another hour. The afternoon light moved across the valley the way it did this time of year, slow and golden and deeply unhurried. A hawk circled somewhere above the tree line. When Hector came back out, he had 4 pages, 4 full pages written on both sides, in his small, dense handwriting. He had not written 4 pages to any of the 5 women combined. He handed the pages to Silas, folded into an envelope addressed in his careful block letters. He didn't say anything. Silas didn't say anything either. He took the envelope and put it inside his coat. They sat on the porch and drank coffee until the light went. Before he went back down the mountain, Silas paused on the path and looked back at the cabin. The lamp was on in the window. The smoke from the chimney was rising straight up in the still evening air. He stood there for a moment. Lord, he thought, I don't ask for many things, but let this one go right. He walked back down to Caldwell in the dark, sure-footed on a path he knew from 7 years of climbing. The letter was in his coat, and somewhere in Columbus, Ohio, Wren Alcott was grading arithmetic papers and drinking tea, and waiting with her eyes open for something she had asked for, and was not certain she would receive. The mountain held all of this, the cabin, the woodpile, the flowers along the fence that Hector never talked about, the scar from 1868, the wall of the church built in a single night in December, the 5 departures, the cracked spines of well-read books, the sunsets watched alone for 7 years. The mountain held it all the way mountains hold things, completely, without judgment, without asking what any of it meant. That was for the people to figure out. And somewhere in the machinery of post offices and stage lines and long paper routes between Ohio and Montana, 2 letters were moving toward each other. One going east with 4 pages of a man trying, for the first time in his life, to say exactly what he meant, and one already sent, waiting to see if the truth she had identified in a stranger's advertisement was something real or something she had needed badly enough to imagine. The mountain waited. It was very good at waiting. The letter took 11 days to reach Columbus. 11 days is a long time when you are waiting. Wren knew this. She has taught herself over 7 years of widowhood not to count days. Counting days was how you turned hope into arithmetic and arithmetic into disappointment. So, she did not count. She counted anyway. On the 12th morning, she found the envelope on her doorstep, delivered early by the postal boy who always left things on the step, rather than knocking because he was 14, and knocking on doors made him anxious. She picked it up, looked at the handwriting on the outside, block letters, careful. The kind of handwriting that belongs to someone who learned it slowly and then never stopped using it with precision. She did not open it on the step in the cold. She went inside. She put the kettle on. She sat at the kitchen table and placed the envelope in front of her and looked at it while the water heated. Kepler, the cat, jumped onto the table and sat beside the envelope and looked at her. "Don't," she said. He looked at the envelope. "I know," she said. She opened it. 4 pages, both sides. Dense, small handwriting that ran margin to margin with the focused energy of a person who had a great deal to say and was saying it all at once before losing the nerve. He was reading Walden. But he disagreed with Thoreau about solitude. Thoreau, Hector wrote, treated solitude like a philosophy, a chosen thing, a refinement of the spirit. He had never tried it for 7 consecutive years without choosing it. Solitude chosen is a luxury. Solitude that simply continues because nothing has changed it is something else entirely. He wrote about the mountain, not the romantic version, the actual version, the mud in spring. The way the road became impassable for weeks. The silence that was not peaceful at 3 in the morning. The difficulty of being 6 feet 8 in a world built for people who are not. He wrote 1 paragraph about the 5 women who had come and gone. He did not blame any of them. He explained, matter-of-factly, that he had begun to understand. The problem was not his size or his face or the distance from town. It was something harder to fix. He was not sure what to call it. He just knew it was his. And then, at the bottom of the 4th page in slightly larger letters, as if he had pressed harder with the pen. You asked what I am reading. I told you. Now I have a question for you. Why did the article make you write rather than laugh? Most people laughed. I would like to understand the difference. Wren read the letter twice. Then she put it down, picked up her tea, looked out the window at the January street, gray and cold and ordinary. Then she went to her desk and wrote back. They wrote to each other for 2 months, February, March. The letters went back and forth between Columbus and Caldwell, with a regularity that Gerald at the post office began to anticipate, and Silas Drum began to observe, with the careful attention of someone watching a thing grow that could still be damaged by too much interference. Wren's letters were precise. She answered his questions directly. She asked better questions in return. She did not perform. She did not describe herself in the flattering way of women writing to impress. She wrote as she thought, in complete sentences and incomplete ones. In sudden tangents and then sharp returns, Hector's letters grew longer each time. This surprised him. He was not a man who expanded naturally. But her questions were the kind that opened things rather than closing them. She asked what the valley looked like in February. He tried to describe it and found himself writing 2 pages. She asked what he had wanted to be before he came to the mountain. He sat with that question for 3 days before he answered it, and the answer was 5 pages and surprised him when he read it back. He had wanted to be a teacher. He had not known that until he wrote it. In March, Wren wrote, I am going to ask you something direct, and I would like a direct answer. If I came to Caldwell in April, would you meet me? Hector read that sentence 6 times. He wrote back the same day. 1 line, yes. I will be at the post office. She told her mother in a letter 3 days before she bought her ticket. This was strategic. Letters took time to arrive. By the time her mother received the news and composed a response and sent it back, Wren would already be on the stage west. The response would arrive at an empty house. She had considered this and decided it was not cowardice. It was efficiency, her mother's response, which arrived a week later at a boarding house in Missouri, where Wren was 2 days into her journey, was 4 pages of concentrated maternal alarm. What do you know about this man? What does anyone know about this man? There was an article, a newspaper article, about a Columbus ledger on a mountain in Montana. Wren Louise Alcott. What are you doing? Wren read the letter in her small boarding house room, folded it, placed it in her bag, thought about her mother's face. The expression of controlled fear that Margaret Alcott wore when she was trying not to show she was afraid. She wrote a reply, "Dear Mother, I am going to find out if what I think I read in that advertisement is true. If I am wrong, I will come home. If I am right, I will write you a longer letter. Love, Wren." She posted it and got back on the stage. Caldwell in April was mud, the kind of mud that has opinions about where you step. The kind that grabs the heel of a boot and holds it with the quiet determination of something that has been waiting all winter to make a point. Wren stepped off the stage and immediately sank 2 inches. She pulled her foot free, reset, looked at the street, one long mud road, a general store, a blacksmith, a church with a crooked steeple, a post office. Standing in front of the post office, the largest human being she had ever seen in her life. She had known he was large. She had read the article. She had read his letters. He had told her, plainly, without softening, that he was 6'8" and that his face had a scar from a chain accident and that he was not handsome, and he was not going to pretend otherwise. She had thought she was prepared. She was not prepared. Not in the way you are not prepared for something terrifying. In the way you are not prepared for something that is more than you imagined. More present. More real. More, the word arrived unexpectedly. More. He was standing very still in front of the post office with his hat in his hands, because it was slightly too small to sit correctly on his head, and he had given up on it. His coat was dark wool, clean, the kind of coat a man puts on when he is trying to make an effort and knows it matters. His face was exactly as described, the scar, the jaw, the arrangement of features assembled by weather and time, and hard living onto something that was not handsome and knew it. But his eyes, his eyes, blue. The blue of high-altitude sky in the 10 minutes after sunrise. And they were looking at her with an expression she recognized instantly, because she had seen it in her own mirror at 3 in the morning more times than she could count. Careful. Waiting. Already preparing for the next thing to go wrong. She crossed the mud street toward him. 2 inches deep on the left, 3 on the right, she noted. The mud had terrain. She stopped 6 feet in front of him, looked up. He looked down. "Wild, I'm Wren Alcott," she said. "I know," he said. "I was told what stage you were on. Silas Humdrum?" "Gerald, actually. He reads the incoming manifests. Of course he does." She looked at him a moment longer. "You're bigger than your letters," suggested. Something moved in his face. Not quite a smile. "The precursor to one. Letters are flat," he said. "That's true." She looked past him toward the mountain road. "Is the road bad?" "Passable," he said. "Barely?" "Good." She picked up her bag. "Then let's go before I lose a boot." Reverend Silas Drum had climbed to meet her at the post office that morning. He had spoken with her for perhaps 20 minutes, while Hector waited at a careful distance that was not quite eavesdropping. Range and absolutely was. What Silas said to her, Hector never fully knew feats. What Hector heard, in fragments, 8 years, honest man, not what people think, did something, doesn't talk about it. What Wren said back clearly, at normal volume, which told him she knew he could hear. "I'm not here because of what people think." Silas had looked over at Hector with an expression that could only be described as theological satisfaction. The wagon road up Blackridge Mountain took 2 hours in good weather. This was not good weather. Technically, it was April, which in Montana is a month that cannot decide what it wants to be and expresses this indecision through aggressive meteorological variety. It had rained 2 days ago. The road had opinions about this. Wren sat on the wagon bench beside Hector. The bench was designed for 2 people of approximately average size. Hector was not approximately average size. The geometry was therefore unusual. She was pressed closer to him than she would have been in any other wagon, and she was aware of this, the way you are aware of something that requires a decision. You could address it, or you could simply continue. She continued. She looked at the mountains instead. This was the right decision, because the mountains. She had lived 32 years in Ohio, which is a good state with fine people and entirely reasonable topography, and she had never understood, in any embodied way, what the word vast actually meant. She understood it now. The ranges rose on both sides of the valley road, with the casual authority of things that have been enormous. For so long they have forgotten it, requires comment. The pines went up the slopes like something organized by a very ambitious deity. The snow on the upper ridges caught the afternoon light and threw it back in colors she did not have names for. She did not say anything for the first mile, just looked then. It is extraordinary, Hector said. Yes, the article didn't describe the mountains. The article was about me, not the mountains. The article was about what sold papers. She turned to look at him. He was watching the road with the focused attention of a man navigating something that required genuine attention, which it did. You were the attraction. The mountains were just setting. He considered this. That seems about right. It isn't right, she said. The mountains are the point. You just happen to live in them. He glanced at her. She was looking at the ridgeline again. He looked back at the road. She is not what I expected, he thought. And then, I don't know what I expected. And then he stopped thinking about it, because the road curved and required both hands on the reins. The cabin appeared from behind a stand of pines, with the suddenness of things that have been there all along. She went still on the seat. He stopped the wagon. Gave her a moment to look. She was looking at it, the way the 5 previous women had looked at it. He had learned to read the looking, the way the shoulders changed, the way the hands shifted. The small physical recalibrations of someone taking in information and deciding what to do with it. He could not read this one. Her shoulders didn't change. Her hands were still. She just looked at the cabin, with her head slightly tilted and an expression that he couldn't identify from the side, and didn't want to misread. Then, the chimney is centered. Yes, he said. That's harder than it looks to get right. It is. Did you build it yourself? Most of it. The stonework took 2 seasons. She looked at the fence line. At the small cleared area between the fence and the cabin, where something was beginning to come up through the mud. Not growing yet, exactly. Pushing toward growing. Are those? She stopped. My mother kept them, Hector said. Before he could think about whether to say it. In a tin can on the windowsill. I had the seeds. Wren was quiet for a moment. Then, what kind? Columbine. And something she called summer lace. I'm not sure of the real name. Another silence. Shorter. They'll be beautiful in June, she said. He had been told it by no one, ever. He did not know what to do with it. So he got down from the wagon and went to unharness the horse, and gave himself a few minutes to be busy with something practical, while whatever that sentence had done to his chest settled down. She walked inside without being invited. He noticed this. Filed it under. Different. He followed, ducking through the doorframe. Automatic, 7 years of practice. And found her standing in the center of his main room. Still. Looking at the bookshelf first, her eyes went straight to it. He watched her scan the spines from across the room, and he could tell, from the focus of it, that she was actually reading the titles, and not just acknowledging that there were books. Then she turned. Thoreau is in the wrong place, she said. He blinked. What? You have him shelved with the natural history. He's philosophy. He belongs with the philosophy. She walked to the shelf, reached up, pulled out the Walden, looked at the spine, looked at the margin visible on the open page, put it back. You've argued with him in the margins. He's not always right. He thinks solitude is a choice, she said, like a hat you put on when you want to think clearly and take off when you're done. Hector stood in the center of his own room and felt something happen in the area of his sternum. That's, he started. Exactly what you said in your letter, she finished. I know. I thought about it on the stage for 3 days. I think you're right and he's wrong. She said it simply. Without performance. The way you say something you've worked out and are confident in. He did not know what to do with that either. This is going to be complicated, he thought. And then, before he could examine that thought further. Good. She reorganized the books that afternoon, not all of them. Just the philosophy section, which had been integrated, apparently, with the natural history and the mathematics and one volume of what appeared to be German poetry that Hector could not explain to her satisfaction. It was my mother's, he said. She looked at it. Put it in a separate small section on the second shelf. Its own space. He watched her do this and said nothing. Because there was nothing useful to say. Because she had looked at that book and understood something without being told, and had responded to that understanding with a small precise action, and the whole sequence had taken approximately 4 seconds and had somehow rearranged something in him that had been in the same position for years. She turned and found him looking at her. Neither of them said anything. Dinner, she said finally. I was going to make. What were you going to make? He paused. Salt pork and potatoes. She looked at him, a very specific look, the kind that does not require elaboration. Sit down, she said. He sat at his own table in his own kitchen and watched her investigate his pantry with the systematic efficiency of someone who has spent years teaching children how to approach problems. Methodically, without panic. Starting from what was there rather than mourning what wasn't, she found dried beans, onion, a string of smoked meat, herbs he did not know when those had arrived in his pantry. Possibly he had bought them, at some point and forgotten. She cooked. He watched. She was not, he would discover, over the coming weeks, a spectacular cook. She was competent, reliable. The food she made was good in the way that things built correctly are good. Nothing surprising, everything solid, nothing to complain about. But that first dinner, she made a bean stew that was better than anything he had produced from that kitchen in 14 years. And when she set the bowl in front of him and he took the first bite, he went very still. Not because it was extraordinary, because it was warm, in a specific way. The warmth of food made by someone who was paying attention to you. He had not been paid attention to in a long time. He ate the whole bowl. She ate hers without fanfare. Looking out the window at the valley, comfortable in the silence the way he was. You are not what I expected, he said. She turned from the window. What did you expect? He thought about it. Someone who needed me to explain the silence. I've been living alone for 6 years, she said. I know what silence is, a pause. I just prefer this kind. He looked at her. Shared, she said, and turned back to the window. The next morning she moved the books again. Not the philosophy section. The history. He found her on the ladder, with a stack of 3 volumes, shifting them left. Good morning. Your history section is chronological but not consistent. You've mixed primary sources with secondary analysis. Gibbon is next to Parkman. They should not be next to each other. They were both about empires. One wrote about empires. One described the fall of one. Very different projects. He crossed his arms. I've been using that system for 14 years, I know. She descended the ladder, looked at the shelf. Then at him. How long did it take you to find things? A pause. Longer than it should have, he admitted. She nodded, went back up the ladder. He stood there for a moment with his arms still crossed. Then he unfolded them, picked up the coffee pot, poured 2 cups, set one on the table next to the ladder. She looked down at it. He went back to the kitchen. From behind him he heard her say, Thank you, small, quiet. He did not answer. He did not need to. But something in the morning rearranged itself slightly, like furniture moved an inch. The room suddenly felt more like it had always been meant to be. The first real argument came on the 4th day. About Thoreau. Obviously, she had finished his copy of Walden. She had read quickly, with a pencil, and left her own marks in the margins, which she had done, without asking permission, which he had noticed immediately. Upon finding the book on the table, with new writing in it, and had spent 20 minutes deciding how to address. What he decided was, directly, You wrote in my book. She looked up from the kitchen table, where she was writing a letter. I wrote next to your writing. It's my book. It was a conversation, she said. You started it in 1869. She turned the book to show him a margin note in his handwriting. Wrong about this, next to a passage, about the virtue of total isolation. I was responding. You could have responded in your own notebook. Then you wouldn't have seen it. He stood there. She waited. You think he's wrong about the pond, he said. Not a question. He had read her margin note. I think the pond was a 2-year experiment, she said. He went home for dinner regularly. His mother did his laundry. He was alone at the pond. He was not actually isolated. He was, she chose the word, recreating isolation. Like a theatrical production, Hector sat down across from her. That's a strong argument, she said. It's the correct argument, she said. No modesty, no hedging, just correct. You're very certain, he said. About some things, she said. About the ones I've thought through. And if you're wrong, she picked up her pencil. Then someone will show me where. And I'll think it through again. She looked at him over the book. Is that why you marked his margins? To argue with him? To think, he said. Arguing and thinking aren't the same. No, she said, but for you they might be. He looked at her. She went back to her letter. He picked up the Walden and read her margin notes for the next hour. She was right about the pond. He did not tell her this immediately. He sat with it for a day. Then, the following evening, he handed the book back to her with one new margin note next to hers. You're right about the pond. She read it, looked up, said nothing, but she smiled, small, private. The kind that happens before you can decide whether to let it. He had expected her to be frightened of the mountain. The first 4 mornings he waited for it. The 5th morning, he stopped waiting and started noticing instead. She was not frightened. She was interested. She went out before breakfast each morning with the small notebook she had brought from Columbus, and she walked the near paths without asking his permission. And she came back with mud on her boots, and her hair disturbed by wind and pages of notes about things she had seen. Birds, primarily. She had been watching birds since childhood, she told him. She could identify by call alone. She could track migration patterns. She had a system. He followed her one morning. Not secretly. He simply fell into step behind her at a distance, because she was going toward the East Ridge, and the East Ridge in Oval had particular hazards that she did not yet know. She heard him within 30 seconds. She did not turn around. You can walk beside me, she said. If you're going to shadow me, you might as well be useful. He came up beside her. They were quiet for a moment. Hazards? She asked. Soft ground near the creek edge. Looks solid. Isn't. Thank you. She made a note in her book. What else? The old pine on the northeast side. The root system is failing. Don't stand under it in wind. Noted. She was writing. Then, what's the red bird? There, she pointed, fast, at a flash of color in the pines to their left. He looked. Tanager, she wrote it down. Do they nest here sometimes? In the higher pines. What time of morning do they sing? He had never been asked this. He thought about it. He had heard them for years without cataloging the time. Early, he said. Before full light, she looked at him sideways. You listen. Everyone listens. No, she said. They hear. You listen. There's a difference. He did not answer. She went back to her notes. They walked the ridge together for 2 hours. She asked questions. He answered the ones he knew. Said, I don't know for the ones he didn't, which she noted was unusual in a man, and then immediately corrected herself. That was unfair to say, and he said, it was accurate to say, and she laughed. Once. Short. When they came back to the cabin. He made coffee and she took off her muddy boots on the porch and left them on the step with the practical efficiency of someone who had decided this was going to be a habit. He looked at the boots on his porch step. 2 boots. Small. Covered in mountain mud. He went inside and did not think about it for approximately 4 minutes. Then he thought about it anyway. The letter from her mother arrived on the 10th day. Gerald had sent it up with the timber hauler who came through weekly. Hector handed it to her without comment. He did not know who it was from. He could tell from the handwriting on the envelope. that it was not casual. It had the tight, controlled script of someone writing formally to make a point. She read it at the kitchen table while he was outside. He came in an hour later, and she was still at the table. The letter refolded in front of her hands around her coffee cup, looking at the valley through the window, with an expression he was beginning to recognize. The working through something expressions. The one she wore when she was thinking hard enough that the rest of her face went quiet, to give the thinking more room. He did not ask, he made dinner. She came to the table when it was ready. Ate. Then, "My mother thinks I've lost my mind. Has she met you?" he said. She looked at him, because, he said, choosing each word with the care of a man who does not speak often and knows it, "You are the least mind-losing person I've encountered." A pause. "You have a limited sample size," she said. "5 brides," he said. "I have a sample size of 5. That's not actually a sample size. That's a cautionary tale." He almost smiled. She almost smiled back. "She is frightened," Wren said. "About her mother. She reads frightened as reasonable. There's a difference." She picked up her fork. "Set it down. She's not wrong, exactly. She just doesn't trust that I know what I'm doing, do you?" he said. She looked at him steadily. "I came here to find out," she said. "That's not the same as not knowing what I'm doing. That's the definition of doing it correctly." He sat with that. She picked her fork up again. Outside, the wind was starting. The pines made their sound. The one that could frighten you at 3 in the morning if you let it, or comfort you if you understood that it was just the sound of the world continuing. He understood it. After 7 years, he understood it completely. He looked across the table at Wren Alcott. She was eating her dinner and looking at the window and listening to the wind, the way she listened to everything. With attention. With the patient precision of someone filing information for later. She was not frightened. She was paying attention. He was not used to being paid attention to. He realized, going to have to learn. Bram Lockett arrived on a Wednesday in June. Hector saw him coming up the road from the valley, long before he reached the cabin. You could see the lower road from the east side of the porch, if you knew where to look. A man on a good horse, riding with the comfortable ease of someone who knew horses well, and had money enough to own good ones. He came alone. That was the first thing Hector noticed. Not a letter carrier. Not a timber hauler. Not Silas, a man alone on a good horse. Coming up Blackridge, Hector went inside. Wren was at the table with her notebook. She looked up. "Someone's coming," he said. She frowned. "Who? I don't know." "Man, good horse." He paused. Well-dressed. Something crossed her face. Fast. Then gone. She went to the window. He watched her look at the approaching figure. Watched the small stillness come over her, the working through something expression, except this time faster. Compressed. Bram Lockett. She said he waited. "Friend of the family," she said. Careful. Each word placed. "My mother's idea of a solution." "To what?" he said. She turned from the window. "To me." Bram Lockett was 38, well-made, and had the ease of a man who had never once been too large for a room. He dismounted in the yard with fluid grace. Tied the horse with a knot that was correct but not the best one, for the post, which told Hector he knew horses, but not work horses. He came to the door and knocked with 3 clean knocks. The knock of someone used to doors being opened for him. Hector opened the door. Bram Lockett looked up at him. To his credit, and Hector gave it, because credit was due, he did not go backward. He steadied. He extended his hand. Bram Lockett. "I'm looking for Wren Alcott." Hector looked at the hand, shook it. The size differential was significant. "She's inside." He stepped back. Lockett came in. Wren was at the table. She had not stood up. She was sitting in her chair with her hands flat on the table, and her face, entirely neutral, which Hector was learning was her equivalent of armor. "Bram," she said. "Wren." He looked around the room. At the books. At the rearranged shelf. At the 2 coffee cups on the kitchen counter. Then at Hector, who had come back inside and was standing near the door in the way he stood when he was managing the size of himself. Not shrinking, just positioning. Aware of the room. Aware of how much of it he occupied. Lockett said, "Your mother asked me to come, I know. Ren said. She's worried. I know that too, Ren. He glanced at Hector, then back at her. The glance said several things. The primary thing being, can we speak privately? Ren did not move. You can say what you came to say, Bram. Mr. Vane is not a piece of furniture. A pause. Lockett had the grace to adjust. He turned slightly, acknowledging Hector more fully. I came to see if Ren is all right, he said to both of them, and if she wanted to come back to Columbus. Ren said, yes, with you. A slightly longer pause. If that's what she wanted. Yes. Ren looked at him. Then she looked at Hector. Hector was looking at the floor. Not retreating. Just giving her room. The deliberate, careful gift of not watching her during something that required her own air. She looked back at Bram. I appreciate you riding 3 days, she said. That was kind of you. And I know my mother asked you with the best intentions, and those intentions came from love, and I don't dismiss them. Bram nodded. Carefully. But I need you to hear something, she said. I am not here because I ran out of options. I am not here because I lost my mind or my judgment or my sense of what's appropriate for a widow of 32. She kept her voice even. Not cold. Not angry. Just clear. The way she explained a problem to a student who needed the explanation delivered without flinching. I am here because I chose to be, and those are two very different things. Bram looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Hector. Hector was still looking at the floor, still giving her room. He's not even fighting for her, Lockett thought. He's letting her fight for herself. Something shifted in his assessment, not dramatic. Just a recalibration. All right, he said. Ren said, thank you. Bram took his hat from the table, looked around the room one more time, at the books, at the 2 cups, at the flowers visible through the window, the columbine, and starting up along the fence line in the early summer warmth. At the man who was still standing by the door, like a mountain that had learned patience. You built this yourself? He asked Hector. Most of it, Hector said. Bram nodded slowly, put his hat on. Good work, he said, simply. Then he walked out. They heard his horse on the yard gravel, then the road, then nothing. Hector looked at Ren. She had her hands in her lap. She was looking at the table. I'm going to get some wood, he said. He went outside. He did not get wood. Palms. He stood in the yard for a while in the afternoon sun and looked at the valley and let the various things happening in his chest settle into their proper positions. She had not left. She had not even considered leaving. She had told a man who rode 3 days to come get her. No. With the same flat precision she used to explain that Thoreau had it wrong about the pond. He stood in the yard for 10 minutes. Then he got some wood. Because the wood did actually need getting. The pile he built that evening was not as large as the one after Philippa's article, but it was solid, neat. The work of a man who was for the first time in a long time building something towards something. The storm came in November, not without warning. The mountain always warned, if you knew how to listen. The pressure change in the air. The way the horses moved, restless, short-tempered, pressing to the back of the barn. The quality of the clouds on the northern ridge, dense and gray-green, and moving with a purpose that distinguished them from ordinary weather clouds, the way intention is distinguishable from accident. Hector had been reading that weather since 1866. Storm coming, he told Ren at breakfast. Bad one, before nightfall. Don't go past the near tree line, she said. Understood. She went out at 9 in the morning toward the near path, with her notebook. Because the birds moved differently before a storm and she had been wanting to document it, he let her go. She knew the near path. She had walked it 100 times since April. She knew the soft creek edge, the failing pine, the places where the ground looked solid and wasn't. The storm came at noon, 2 hours early. He knew the moment it turned. The light changed, sudden, specific. The way a room changes when someone large enters it. And the wind went from north to northeast, and the temperature dropped 4 degrees in the space of a minute. He was out the door in 30 seconds. He found her tracks on the near path, followed them east. Past the soft creek edge, which she had avoided correctly, past the failing pine. Then off the main path, toward the ridge overlook, because that was where the birds congregated before a storm. and she would have gone where the birds were. He had known she would go there. He should have said that this morning. He said nothing to himself about this. There was no useful thought available, only walk faster. The snow came horizontal. The temperature had taken another drop. The world shrank to 10 feet in every direction, and the trees turned to shapes. He knew these trees. He had walked this mountain for 7 years. He walked without hesitation, following her tracks where they were visible, and the logic of her movement where they weren't. He found her in the hollow near the ridge overlook, a natural shelter. He had shown it to her in September, pointed it out as a place that caught sun in the morning. She had remembered it. She had gone there when the storm turned. She was sitting with her back against the rock face, her coat pulled tight, her legs drawn up, and her notebook on her knees. She had been writing. He stopped in the entrance of the hollow. She looked up, he looked at her, at the notebook, at the pencils still in her hand. "You were writing," he said. "The birds came before the storm," she said. 11 species I hadn't seen together before. I needed to record it. He stood in the howling snow at the entrance of the rock hollow and looked at the woman who had been stranded on his mountain in a blizzard and had used the time to take notes. "Are you hurt?" he said. "My ankle." She said it matter-of-factly, not minimizing, not dramatic. "I came down wrong on the last path. It's not serious. I can walk." Slowly, he crossed the hollow in 2 strides, knelt, looked at the ankle. It was swelling. The boot was still on, which was correct. She had not removed it, which told him she knew enough to leave it contained. "It's a sprain," he said. "I thought so," she said. "Can we get back before full dark?" He looked at the snow, at the light, at the distance. "Yes," he said. "If we go now," he stood. She gathered her notebook. He held out his hand without thinking. She took it without thinking. He pulled her up. She put weight on the ankle. He saw the small movement in her face. Not crying, not even close. Just the private adjustment of someone absorbing pain without performing it. He adjusted his grip on her hand. They went back. Through the snow, it took twice as long as it should have. She did not complain once. She told him on the second stretch that the tanager had been there. She'd heard it before the snow started, which was unusual. She told him that the cloud formation before the storm had matched something she'd read about in a meteorology text she'd had since college. She told him that the first flake she'd seen had been on a cedar branch to her left, not falling but resting, which struck her as the wrong direction for snow. He listened to all of this. He was aware, in a way he rarely was, of her hand in his, small, cold now, holding on with the grip of someone who trusted the hold. He did not examine this too closely. There was walking to do. There was weather. There was a 2-mile path in blizzard conditions with a woman who had a sprained ankle. He was useful in emergencies. He had always been useful in emergencies. They reached the cabin as the sky went fully dark. He built the fire. He made her sit. He found the linen strips he kept for injuries. He wrapped her ankle with the careful precision of a man who had been wrapping his own injuries for years and had developed a technique. She watched him do it. He was aware of her watching. When he was done, he sat back on his heels and checked the wrap. Firm. Even. "Right, thank you," she said. "Yes," he said, because "you're welcome" felt wrong. Because what he wanted to say was, "Don't do that again," which felt wrong for different reasons. Because what he actually felt was something he did not have an immediate word for. Something large and specific. Something that had been growing since April without his permission. He stood. He made dinner. He ate it without tasting it. She ate hers and talked about the birds and did not notice, or pretended not to notice, that he was not entirely present in the conversation, that some part of him was still in the hollow, still looking at her, at the notebook on her knees, at the pencil in her hand. She was taking notes, he thought. She was stranded in a blizzard, and she was taking notes. He did not know what to do with that. It fit nowhere in his existing categories. It made him feel something that was new enough that he had no shelf to put it on. He left it on the floor for now, and went to get more wood. Because the fire needed feeding, and because he needed, very specifically, 30 seconds outside in the cold. He got sick 3 days later, not dramatically, not all at once. The way it came was quiet, a heaviness. First, a weight that sat in the bones like wet wool, then the fever. By the second night, it was high enough that the room moved when he stood, and he sat back down, without acknowledging that he had stood in the first place. Ren noticed within 10 minutes. She was not, he discovered, the kind of person who hovered. She was the kind who assessed and acted. She put her hand on his forehead, once quickly, with the efficiency of a diagnostic tool, and then she went to the kitchen and came back with water and a cloth and the willow bark he kept in the third shelf of the pantry for headaches. "Lie down," she said. "I'm fine," he said. She looked at him. He lay down. She managed his fever through the night, with the same method she applied to everything. Steady, attentive, no wasted motion. Water, medication, light food, when he could take it. He was mostly conscious. Mostly, the edges went soft at some point in the second night. The fever did that. It softened the edges, made things adjacent to dreams, even while you were awake. He was aware of the room, of the fire, of her moving sometimes nearby. He was not aware entirely of what he said. He knew he talked. He always talked in fever. His mother had told him this when he was a boy, that he became a completely different person when sick, that he said more in one night of fever than in 3 weeks of health. He had been told this and not been able to do anything about it. What he said in the second night, he didn't know. He knew one thing he said, one name. He heard himself say it from the inside, which is different from hearing yourself from the outside. From the inside, it feels like being dragged to the surface of water. Cressida, his mother's name. The fever broke on the third morning. He woke to gray light and a room that held still when he looked at it, and the particular bodily exhaustion of a fever leaving. Wrung out, empty, cleaned. Ren was at the table. She had been, he understood from the position of everything in the room, awake most of the night. There were 2 candles burned to the base. Her notebook was open. She had been writing. He could see the pages from here, full pages, her small handwriting. She looked up when he moved. "Good morning," she said. "How long?" he said. 2.5 days. He processed this. "Did I?" He stopped. "Talk?" "Yes," she said. "Quite a bit." He looked at the ceiling. "You talked about the mountain," she said, "about the logging accident in '68. About a book you couldn't finish because the ending was wrong." A pause. "You said your mother's name?" He was quiet. "I didn't ask," she said. "While you were sick?" "I'm not asking now, if you'd rather not." She closed her notebook. "But if you ever want to tell me about her, I'd like to hear." He looked at her across the room. She met his eyes with the same steadiness she brought to everything. Not pushing, not retreating, just there. Available, completely and quietly available. He sat up slowly. His body was a landscape of aches. Was Cresta, he said, was still. "She kept Columbine on the windowsill," he said. "In Pennsylvania. When I was a boy," he looked at the window, at the frost on the glass. "She drew the plans for this cabin, 1861. She drew it on the back of an envelope and said, if she could choose anywhere in the world, she would want to be on a mountain, looking down at a valley." He paused. "She died in '63. I wasn't there. I was away. I got back too late." The room held the silence carefully. "She never saw it," he said. "The cabin. She saw it in her mind," Ren said. "Quietly, when she drew the plans. She saw it then." He looked at her. She was not looking at him with pity. Not with the careful expression of someone managing another person's grief. She was looking at him with recognition. The look of someone who has also lost something real and has not moved past it, but has learned to carry it in a way that doesn't prevent moving. "I think," Ren said, very carefully, "that you built it for her." He did not answer, but he did not look away. And Ren Alcott, who had come to a mountain in Montana on the strength of a 4-line advertisement, and the instinct that she had read something true between the lines. She sat in his kitchen in the gray morning light and understood something she had not known. She was going to understand. She was not just where she had chosen to be. She was where she was meant to be. The mountain held both of them now. It was, she thought, large enough. Nobody talked about the fever. Not directly. Not in the way that people talk about things they want to address and resolve and file away. They simply moved past it, the way you move past a landmark on a long road. You note it. You understand it changed your sense of where you are. And you keep walking. But things were different, small things. The kind you would miss if you weren't paying attention. And Ren paid attention to everything. Hector started making 2 cups of coffee in the morning without being asked. He had been making 1 cup for 14 years. The adjustment happened on the 4th morning after the fever broke. He said nothing about it. He set the 2nd cup on the table near her usual chair and went about his morning as if this were a thing he had always done. She said nothing about it, either. She drank it. That was the agreement they had reached. Not in words. In the space between words, where 2 people who have spent considerable time alone learn to communicate the things that don't fit in sentences, he had told her about Cressida. Not everything, not even most of it, just the edges. Just enough. But the edges were more than he had told anyone ever, and she had received it the way she received most things, steadily, without making it larger than it was. Without turning it into a performance of empathy. She had just sat in his kitchen, in the gray morning, and listened and said the thing that was true, which was that he had built it for his mother, and then she had let it be. He had not known before Ren that letting something be was a form of respect. He knew it now. December came like a door closing. The snow sealed the mountain the way it did every year. Not all at once, but incrementally, the way decisions get made when you're paying attention. A little more each day. The road became suggestion, then memory, then nothing. The valley disappeared under white. The world shrank to the size of the cabin, the barn, the path between them. Hector had lived this shrinking for 7 consecutive winters. He had never found it comfortable exactly, but he had found it manageable. You learned the rhythms. You learned to make enough of everything. You learned that the silence of a sealed mountain was different from the silence of an empty room, which was different again from the silence of a room with someone else in it. This was the first winter the room had someone else in it. It was different. He hadn't predicted how different. He hadn't predicted how different. It was not merely the sound of her footsteps. Lighter than his by a factor that still surprised him sometimes when she crossed a room he thought was empty. The sound of her writing. The scratch of pencil that had become, over 8 months, as familiar as the wind in the pines. The way she laughed sometimes at something she was reading, a single short sound, private and involuntary, not meant for him but landing near him anyway. It was the warmth, not physical warmth. The cabin had always been warm enough. He built good fires, the other kind. The kind that has no clean word in English, only approximations. The sense of a room containing 2 lives rather than 1. The aliveness of a space inhabited by someone who is paying attention to it. He sat across from her at the kitchen table in the evenings and read his book, and she read hers, or wrote in her notebook, and the lamp burned between them and outside the snow. Did what it did, and neither of them needed to fill the silence. He had read the same paragraph 6 times on Tuesday. He had not told her this. She had probably noticed anyway. The conversation came on a Thursday in January. Not planned, not prepared. Those were never the conversations that mattered. He had come inside from the barn later than usual. Ice on the water trough. He'd had to break it twice. His hands were cold in the deep way that takes time to come back from. He sat in the chair near the fire and held his hands near the heat and did not say anything. Ren was at the table. She looked up when he came in. Looked at his hands, said nothing. Got up. Came back with a cloth she had warmed by the fire at some point, when he hadn't noticed, and wrapped it around his hands without asking. He looked at her. She went back to the table. He sat with his hands wrapped in warm cloth and looked at the fire for a while. Then, "What did you before, Thomas?" She went still. Not frozen. Just still. The way she got when something required real thought before answering. "Before Thomas," she repeated. Not a question. She was turning the frame of it. "You were 23 when you married," he said. He had calculated this. She had told him she married in 1863 and she was 32 now. And he had done the arithmetic the way he did most things. Thoroughly. You must have wanted something before that. She put her pencil down, flat on the table. To teach, she said, and to travel. I wanted to go somewhere I had never been and write about what I saw there. A pause. I had a whole book planned about the plants of the eastern woodlands. I was 21. I had already taken 40 pages of notes. What happened to the notes? I still have them. She looked at the window. 40 pages of an unfinished book. I've added to them over the years, in the margins. Around the edges, a small pause. I have more margin now than original text. He looked at her. You could finish it. She turned to look at him. I'm on a mountain in Montana. Yes, he said, with different plants. She opened her mouth, closed it. Something moved in her face. Several things in sequence, too fast to read individually but legible as a group. Surprise first, then the working through something, then something softer, something that was either the precursor to a decision or the aftermath of one. He could not tell which. The columbine along the fence, she said. Yes. The summer lace, yes. I've been drawing them, she said, quietly. In the notebook. Since June, he said nothing. She said nothing. Outside, the snow continued its patient accumulation. You should write the book, he said, finally. The way he said most things that mattered, plainly. Without decoration, she looked at him for a long moment. I might, she said. Which, from Ren Alcott. He had learned was approximately the same as yes. February was the month he built the room. He had not told her he was going to. He had mentioned it once in April when she first arrived. I can build another room if you want, he had said, and she had said the window should face east. That was 9 months ago. He had thought about it since then, in the way he thought about most building projects, which was comprehensively and in silence. He started on the 1st of February. She heard the sound from inside the cabin. The particular knock of framing work. She came to the door of the main room and looked at him through the window, already several feet into the structure, moving with the focused efficiency of a man who had made up his mind about something and was now simply completing it. She put on her coat. She went outside. She stood at the edge of what was becoming a room and watched him work. He did not stop. He had learned that she watched the way she listened, without interrupting. She watched to understand, not to comment. After 20 minutes, she said, the north wall needs to be thicker. For insulation, it will be, he said. Without looking up, how thick, he told her. She nodded, went back inside. At noon, she brought him coffee, set it on a flat rock near where he was working. He picked it up, drank it, set it back. That was the whole exchange, but it was enough. She came back out in the afternoon, stood in what was beginning to have the suggestion of a shape, turned east, calculated something. He could see the calculation happening. Here, she said. She stood in a specific spot and held her arm out. If the window is here, at this height, the morning light will come through at exactly the right angle for reading. He looked at where she was standing. He looked at the wall. At the angle of the winter sun. Yes, he said. That's right, she went back inside without further comment. He framed the window where she had stood. It took 3 weeks. She did not ask about progress. She watched it happen and noted it, and occasionally offered specific observations that were always structurally correct and never offered as commands. He incorporated them without discussion. This was, he realized, how they worked. How they had always worked. From the first rearrangement of the books, she saw what was needed. He built what she saw. No hierarchy, no argument about who was in charge, just 2 people, each one capable, making something better together than either would alone. On the day he finished, he came inside in the late afternoon and said, "Done." She looked up from the table. He looked at her, looked at the new door in the wall. Just a simple door, pine boards, fitted correctly, the kind of door that would last. She got up, walked to the door, opened it, went into the new room. He stood in the doorway. The room was simple, clean. The east window caught the last of the afternoon light and threw it across the bare floor in a rectangle of gold, not morning light, but the same angle she had measured, the same quality. She stood in the light, looking at the wall, at the floor. At the window well, she said, very quietly. That was all, but the way she said it, well, like someone who has found the thing they did not know they were looking for. Like the sound of something falling into place. He looked at her standing, in the light of the room he had built, around the place where she had stood, and held her arm out, and said, here he had been building things for 20 years. He had never built anything that felt like this. He asked her to marry him on a morning in February, not a morning he had planned, not with anything prepared. He had been thinking about it for weeks, turning it over, trying to find the right words, which was a process that had consistently produced nothing useful, because the right words for this particular thing did not, as far as he could tell, exist in any arrangement he could construct. So what happened was simpler. They were on the porch, before first light, which was a thing they had started doing in December, without deciding to. One morning she was already out there when he came out, and then the next morning he was already out there when she came out, and after a while it became the thing they did. Before the day started, before anything required anything of either of them. Just the dark and the cold and the mountain going slowly from black to gray, to the first uncertain blue of a morning. She had her coffee. He had his. He looked at the valley. She was looking east, at the place where the light would come, and he said it, not the version he had been constructing for weeks. The real one. The one that came from the part of him that did not polish things. I want to ask you something. She turned. I want you to stay, he said. Not because it's winter, and the road is closed. Not because you've been here long enough that leaving would be complicated. He looked at her. I want you to stay because I built a room for the place where you stood and held your arm out and said, here, and I want there to be more rooms if you want them. And more mornings. And I am not going to pretend to be good at saying this kind of thing. She was looking at him. So, he said, that's what I want. If you want something different, I'll drive you to Caldwell in the spring and I won't say anything unkind about it. Because you were always here on your own terms, and you are still on your own terms now. She was quiet. The sky was doing its slow work. Gray to blue, the first suggestion of pink at the edge of the eastern ridge. When you said more rooms, she said. What rooms were you imagining? He blinked. Specifically, she said. He had not, specifically. He had been speaking in the general direction of Foreve. He had not applied square footage to it. A workroom, he said. For the book, she tilted her head slightly. For the plant book, he said. The one with the margins. She looked at him for another moment. North wall, she said. Good light. Long table. Yes, he said. And shelves, she said. More shelves. The main room is full, I know. And the east window in the new room needs a seat. Under it. Wide enough to sit and read. Yes, he said. I can do that. She turned back to the valley. To the light coming up. To the gold beginning at the far ridge. All right, she said. He looked at her profile in the early light. At the set of her jaw. At the way she held her coffee cup with both hands the way she always did. At the way her eyes moved when she was thinking. Which was different from the way they were still when she had finished. Is that a yes? He said. She looked at him. Hector, she said. I came to Montana in April with one bag. Because I read 4 lines you wrote in an advertisement and thought you were trying to tell the truth. I reorganized your books. I survived a blizzard with my notebook. I told a man who rode 3 days to fetch me that I was exactly where I chose to be. She paused. What do you think? He thought about it. Yes, he said. Correct, she said. Silas Drum cried at the wedding. He would deny this if asked. He had extensive practice denying things that were true and embarrassing, which was a skill developed across 30 years of ministry and maintained with rigorous consistency. But he cried. Not dramatically. He was too contained for dramatic. A single line, down his left cheek, produced when Hector placed the copper ring on Wren's finger. And she looked at it the way she looked at everything, with attention, with care, with the focus of someone who recognizes real workmanship. The ring was not elegant. He had made it from copper wire, polished it for 3 evenings. It caught the morning light through the porch window and threw it back in the way that good copper does. Warm, honest. Nothing pretending to be something it wasn't. She turned it on her finger, looked up at him, said nothing. Which was more than most people managed with words. Silas read the scripture. The ceremony was short because neither of them needed length. They had been building to this for 11 months, with the patient, systematic thoroughness of two people who did not do things by half. The ceremony was just the formal acknowledgement of what had already become true. The witnesses were Silas and Gerald from the post office, who had invited himself with the specific confidence of a man who considered himself instrumental to the whole affair, which was not entirely wrong. Gerald cried more than Silas. He would also deny this. Afterward, Silas stood on the porch with Hector, while Wren made coffee inside. The valley below was white, winter still, but the light had the quality of late February that suggests March is watching from somewhere nearby. Preparing to arrive. Well, Silas said. Hector said, yes, she's something, Silas said. She is. Hector agreed. Strong, very, doesn't put up with nonsense. Hector looked at the old man. Is there a point you're making? Silas smiled, small, private, the smile of a man who has been right about something for a long time, and is choosing not to make a meal of it. No point, he said, just observing. They stood in the cold for another minute, then Silas said very quietly, not looking at Hector. She would have liked her. Hector did not ask who. He didn't need to. Yes, he said. After a moment, she would have. The valley held the silence. Then the door opened, and Wren came out with 3 cups of coffee and said, Gerald is reading the books in the main room. Should I be concerned? Gerald's voice from inside. This organization makes no sense. Wren. I reorganized it in April. Gerald. Thoreau is in the philosophy section. Wren. Correct. Gerald. He should be with natural history. Wren and Hector simultaneously. No. Silas laughed. Real laugh. The full-bodied kind that comes from somewhere deep. He had not heard himself laugh like that since. He could not remember since when. He pressed his hand to his sternum, like he was trying to keep the laugh from escaping entirely. And he laughed at the two of them, saying the same word in the same voice at some moment on the porch of a mountain cabin in February. He had been waiting for this. He had not known he was waiting. But this exact thing. 2 people who had argued about books for 11 months and arrived, at the end of it, at a place where they said "Think, boss" at the same moment without knowing they were going to. He had been a minister for 30 years. He had seen love do many things, and he had never seen it quite like this. That night, for the first time in 14 years, Hector Vane did not lie awake listening to the silence of the other side of the bed. He listened to her breathing instead. Small, steady, completely real. He had not known, until that moment, how much of his life he had spent waiting for exactly that sound. The letter arrived 2 days later. Gerald brought it up himself, which was unusual. Gerald did not usually climb mountains. He was 61 and had opinions about his knees that he expressed frequently. He climbed this one. He found Hector in the barn and handed him the envelope without comment. Then he stood near the barn door in the manner of someone who intends to stay. Hector looked at the envelope, old. The paper had gone yellow at the edges. The postmark was from November of 1871, 17 months ago. The handwriting was neat and feminine and familiar in a way he could not immediately place. He turned it over. The return address said, L. Pemberton, Philadelphia. He went very still, Louisa, the 3rd bride. The one who had stayed 6 days. The one who had left without explanation and left the note under the pillow instead. You deserve someone who comes to you whole. He had read that note many times. 14 months. He still had it in the inside pocket of his winter coat, the small folded paper, more worn now than when she left it. He looked at the postmark again. November 1871. She had written this after she left. This was a letter that had been traveling, badly, slowly, through the uncertain passages of Western mail for 17 months. While 5 women came and went. While a newspaper article was written and circulated, and read in a schoolroom in Ohio. While Wren Alcott wrote to Silas Drum, and asked him to forward a letter to a man she had never met, because she thought he was trying to tell the truth. This letter had been in the system the entire time. Gerald was still at the barn door. "How long has it been at the post office?" Hector asked. "It came through 6 months ago," Gerald said. He had the grace to look slightly ashamed, which was new for Gerald. "It got misfiled. I found it last week, in the 69 ledger. Of all places," he cleared his throat. Before that, the western routing through Salt Lake had a backlog for near on a year after the line trouble in 72. Letters went in and didn't come out. Another pause. "I'm sorry, Hector. It should have reached you in spring of 72. Hector looked at the envelope. Spring of 1872, before Philippa Greer, before the article, before the long winter, when he put away the correspondence papers and decided to stop. If this letter had arrived when it was supposed to, he did not finish that thought. There was no useful version of it. What had happened had happened. What was here now was here, he said. "Thank you for bringing it." Gerald left. Hector stood in the barn with the letter for a long time. Then he went inside. Wren was at the table in the new room, the east room, the one with the window she had specified and the light she had measured. She had her notebook. She was working on the book, the plant book, the one she had been rebuilding from 40 pages of 21-year-old notes and a decade of margins. She worked on it when he came in, looked at the envelope, said nothing, sexum. Waited. He held it out to her. "Before you read it," he said, "there's something else." He reached into the inside pocket of his winter coat, the worn small paper folded and refolded many times. He set it on the table beside the envelope. "She left that when she went. I should have told you about it." Wren looked at the small paper, then at the envelope. She said, "Who is she?" "The third one," he said. "Louisa Pemberton. She stayed 6 days." He sat down across the table. "Foot. She was the closest out of the 5. She wasn't frightened of me. She was frightened of herself. She explained it in that note." He paused. "I kept it because it was the only honest thing anyone said to me directly. In those 2 years." Wren picked up the small paper, unfolded it carefully. "Read it." He watched her face. She read it twice. Then she set it down and looked at the envelope. "May I?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "That's why I gave it to you." She opened the envelope. The letter was 3 pages. He watched her face as she read, watched the expressions that crossed it. The careful ones, the considering ones, the small movements around the eyes that meant she was filing something, understanding something, turning something over. She read it all the way through once. Then she went back and read something in the middle again. Then she set it down. He said, "What does she say?" Wren looked at the letter for a moment longer. Then, "She explains why she left, what she felt, what frightened her about it." She paused. "She says she had started to love you, not as a woman loves the man she's chosen, as the woman loves the idea of being chosen, and she knew the difference. And she left because the honest thing was to leave, rather than stay for reasons that would have made you both unhappy." He said nothing. "She wishes you well," Wren said. "Genuinely. The whole letter is, she's a good person. You can tell from the way she writes." She looked at the small worn note beside the letter. "She kept her word. She wrote the explanation she couldn't say to your face." She touched the edge of the note. "You kept this for 14 months, he said, "because it was the first honest thing." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "She was right to go," Wren said. "What she's describing. Coming to be rescued, rather than to choose. That's not unfair to her. It's just not enough." She looked at him. "You can't build something real with someone who needs you to be their salvation. You can only build something real with someone who is already whole enough to choose you freely." He looked at her. "Is that what you are?" he said. Not unkindly. It was a real question, the realest one. She met his eyes. "I was whole when I came," she said. "Damaged. Missing things, carrying things," a pause. "But whole. I didn't come here to be rescued." She picked up her pencil. "I came here because I read something true and I wanted to know if the rest of the person matched." Another pause. "It did," he said. "More than." She looked at him. He said, "You said it matched. It's more than." More than what I said in those 4 lines. A very small silence. That's the nicest thing you've said to me, she said. It's true, he said. I know, she said. That's why it's nice, she went back to her book. He sat across from her for a while, in the morning light of the east room, the room he had built around the place where she stood, and looked at the 2 pieces of paper on the table between them. The old note and the arrived too late letter. The honest things. The things that had been trying to reach him. They had reached him. Just not the way anyone intended. I'm going to write to her, Wren said. Without looking up, he blinked. To Louisa. Yes. To thank her. She was writing already, something in her book, not the letter. Just the working through something that happened in the notebook first. She told you something true. It found its way here eventually. Even if it was 17 months late, she looked up briefly. Good things sometimes take longer than they should. That doesn't make them less true. He looked at his wife of 2 days at the table in the room he had built for her. Good things sometimes take longer than they should. 7 years, 5 women. A newspaper article meant to embarrass him. A letter from a woman in Ohio who read between the lines of an advertisement and saw something no one else bothered to look for. More than a year of letters, 8 months of mornings, 1 blizzard, 1 fever. 1 moment on the porch in the dark where he said, I want you to stay, and she said, what rooms were you imagining? He exhaled long, slow, like a thing released. I'll make more coffee, he said. Yes, she said. And then I'd like your help with something. He stood. What? She turned the notebook toward him. A drawing, rough but accurate. The mountain plants she had been documenting since April. The columbine along the fence. The summer lace. Several others. I need the correct elevations for each one, and the soil type, and how much direct sun they get in each season. She looked at him. You know this mountain better than anyone. He looked at the drawings. She had been drawing them all along, since June. Careful, observant drawings in the margins of everything else. The book she had thought was unfinishable. She was finishing it, on his mountain, with his plants. His mother's plants, he said. Get a fresh page. She got a fresh page. He sat down across from her, and they worked. Spring came to Black Ridge Mountain, the way it always did, gradually. Then suddenly. One morning, the ice on the water trough was thin enough to break with a fist instead of an axe. One morning, the lower road had the distant sound of running water beneath its surface, snow melting from underneath, before the surface showed it. One morning, the first columbine pushed through the soil, along the fence with the specific determination of something that has been waiting all winter and is done waiting. Wren documented it all, with her pencil and her notebook, and the careful attention she brought to everything. She had now been on Black Ridge Mountain for a full year. She had seen every season. She had walked every path in every weather. She knew the soft creek edge and the failing pine and the place on the east ridge where 11 species of bird gathered before a storm. She had filled 3 notebooks. The book was a third finished. It was better than the one she had planned at 21. Not because she was smarter now, because she knew more, because she had a mountain to work with, because she had someone across the table who knew the elevation soil type of every plant in a 2-mile radius, and gave this information plainly and without inflation, which was exactly what a book about plants required. She worked on it every morning in the East Room. He built shelves in the workroom through March. Long ones. Adjustable. The kind of shelves that could hold books and specimens. And the growing stack of labeled drawings that had begun to accumulate on the work table. She had not asked for the shelves. He had noticed the stack getting larger. So he built shelves. She had come to understand the fundamental language of Hector Vane. He did not say, I see you in words. He built shelves. He framed windows at the angle she had measured. He left the second coffee cup on the table. He wrapped her ankle with care and warm cloth. He walked beside her on the mountain paths when he knew the ground was uncertain. He built and fixed and made and maintained. In the vocabulary of a man who expressed love through labor, she had learned to speak it back. She put his coffee on the table before he asked, She read aloud from the books she thought would interest him and set them where he would find them. She left the porch door propped open in the evenings, so the sound of the valley came in because she had noticed he went quiet in a good way when the valley sounds were in the room. Small adjustments. Continuous. The way a carpenter makes continuous small adjustments when a joint needs to fit exactly right. Two people calibrating toward each other, slowly, and then all at once. The townspeople of Caldwell had opinions about the marriage. This was inevitable. They were a small town with a crooked steepled church, and Gerald, at the post office, reading everything, and a history of treating Hector Vane as their most interesting legend. The marriage of the legend was naturally a matter of significant communal interest. The dominant opinion, as it reached Silas through various channels, was surprised approval. Nobody had expected anyone to stay. 5 hadn't. The 6th was staying. She had been staying for over a year now. She had come down the mountain 3 times, once in summer, once in September, once in December, for supplies. Each time she had walked through Caldwell, with the direct posture and clear eyes of someone who was exactly where she chose to be, and was not interested in being evaluated about it. The women at the Tuesday sewing circle revised their opinions. The men at the saloon maintained more complicated ones. But the complicated ones had shifted from poor woman to something harder to articulate. Something closer to, maybe we had him wrong. Mrs. Aberfield at the general store reported, to anyone who would listen, that the Alcott woman, they hadn't updated to Vane yet, partly because it surprised them that she had ordered 3 specific reference books on botany from the Eastern distributors and had paid for them from her own money, and had asked, without any particular drama, whether it was possible to get regular shipments of quality paper in large quantities. It was possible. The paper arrived monthly now. It went up Blackridge with the timber hauler. It came back, eventually, as pages of a book. Silas climbed the mountain on a Tuesday in late April. He made this trip monthly still. Had done, for 8 years. Certain things didn't need to stop just because circumstances changed. He found them on the porch, morning light. Both of them, sitting in the chairs that had been there since he first visited in 1866. 2 chairs now, close. The second one appearing sometime in May of the previous year without comment. Wren had a book. Hector had his coffee and was looking at the valley, with the expression Silas spent 8 years trying to read and had never quite been able to. He could read it now. Not peace exactly. Something more active than peace. Presence. The full, attentive presence of a man who has finally found the place where his sighs and his silence and his stubborn, enormous heart make sense. Not as problems to be managed, but as the specific qualities of this specific life. The valley below was beginning to green. The upper snow retreating upward, uncovering the lower slopes in the advancing warmth of spring. Silas sat in the 3rd chair. The one kept on the porch for visitors, which Wren had put there in November, without explanation and without it being requested. Because she was the kind of person who thought ahead in practical ways about the needs of other people, they gave him coffee. They sat together on the porch of the cabin that Cressida Vane had drawn on the back of an envelope in 1861 and described as a mountain looking down at a valley. The cabin that Hector had spent 16 years building into something real. The cabin that now had 4 rooms and a workroom with long shelves and an east window that caught the morning light at exactly the angle a woman had measured by standing in a specific spot and holding her arm out. The valley went on doing what it had always done, being enormous, being beautiful, being, in the stubborn, inarticulate way of wilderness, presence, sat in the 3rd chair and drank his coffee and said, after a while, "There's talk in town," Wren said. "There's always talk in town, good talk," Silas said. This time, she turned a page in her book. "Gerald reads too much. He means well," Silas said. "He reads everything that comes through the post," she said. "That's not meaning well. That's a character flaw he's made peace with." Hector made a sound that might have been a laugh. From anyone else, it would have been a laugh. From Hector, it was the sound adjacent to one, the sound he made. When something struck him as true and funny at the same moment and he didn't quite know which to do with it. Silas looked at him. Hector looked back. 8 years of monthly visits. 8 years of knowing this in the way that you know someone you have chosen to keep showing up for. Through the 5 women and the 5 departures. Through the logging accident and the scar. Through the newspaper article and the woodpile. Through the winter of 1872. When Hector had stopped writing letters and returned to the routine of solitude with the exhaustion of a man who has tried something real and had it. Through all of it, Silas had known. Not that Wren Alcott existed, not the particulars, just, this man deserves someone, and someday someone will still see it. He had been right, it had taken longer than he thought. But he had been right, he looked at the valley. At the morning light moving across it in the slow gold way of spring. At the columbine beginning to come up along the fence line. Purple and delicate, the plants from a dead woman's windowsill growing in the soil her son had prepared for them. She would be glad, he said. He didn't need to say who. Hector looked at the columbine. Yes, he said. Quietly, she would. Wren turned another page. She did not comment. She was not a person who filled silences that were already full. She understood, in the way she understood most things, that this moment did not require her. That it was between Hector and something older than she was. Something that had been waiting here since before she came. She sat in her chair, in the morning light of the east porch, and read her book, and the mountain held all of it. The old grief and the new beginning. The man who had built a cabin for a woman who never saw it, and the woman who had come to fill the rooms. The letters that arrived too late, and the ones that arrived at exactly the right moment. The 5 departures, and the one arrival that changed the mathematics of everything. The mountain held it all the way. It held everything. Completely. Without judgment. The snow on the upper ridges, retreating upward in the spring warmth. Uncovering everything that had been waiting underneath. Patient, sure, already knowing what it would find. Wren finished the first section of the book that summer. 40 pages of mountain plants, documented through all 4 seasons. Drawing and description and elevation and soil type. The kind of book that required time and place and sustained attention. The kind that cannot be written from memory or intention alone. She read the 40 pages to Hector on a Sunday evening. He listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. She waited. The section on the columbine, he said. You said the flowers open to the east. They do. My mother used to say they were looking for the morning. He paused. She said, bet. All the best things looked for the morning. Wren looked at him. He looked at the pages in her hands. Put that in, he said. If you want. That she said that. I'd like to credit her. Wren said. Cressida Vane, he said. She would like that. Wren wrote it in the margin first. Then, later, onto the page properly. The columbine. It was once observed by Cressida Vane of Pennsylvania, appears to open its face toward the morning light, as though looking for something expected and welcome. This observation was made by a woman who never saw these particular plants growing, but drew the plans for the house near which they grow, and who understood, from a distance of both time and geography, what they were looking for. She read it back to him. He was quiet. Then, good, just that good. Which, from Hector Vane, was everything on a morning in September. A full year and a half after Wren Alcott stepped off a stage. In the mud of Caldwell, Montana, she was sitting on the east porch, in the early light, with her coffee and her notebook, when Hector came out and handed her a letter, new envelope, recent postmark, Ohio. She looked at the handwriting, did not recognize it immediately, opened it. Ride. It was from Louisa Pemberton. She had written back. Wren had sent her letter in March. This was the reply. It had taken 6 months, which was still faster than the original had been 17. She read it twice. Then she held it out to Hector. He read it standing. Louisa wrote that she was glad. That was the primary thing. Just glad. She had married, the previous autumn, a man she described as steady and honest and not given to pretense, and she thought Wren would understand why those particular qualities mattered. She wrote, I learned something. in those 6 days on your mountain that I did not know I was going to learn. I learned the difference between needing to be chosen and choosing. I did not understand it at the time. I understood it on the road back to Caldwell, and I carried it for 2 years until I met someone I wanted to choose, and I chose him, and he chose me back. And we have been building something real ever since. She wrote, I am glad the mountain found the right person. I always believed it would. Some things take longer than they should. That doesn't make them less true. Hector read that last line. He looked at Wren. She looked back. Between them, a year and a half of mornings, a room with an east window, a book about mountain plants, a copper ring polished for 3 evenings that fit exactly right, a shelf of reorganized books, 2 coffee cups always on the counter, the sound of writing in the evenings, arguments about Thoreau, shared silence that was the good kind, the proof accumulated daily that 2 people could find a place that had exactly enough room. The mountain had known this from the beginning. It was good at knowing things. It had been here long enough. That evening they sat on the porch, as they did every evening. East porch for mornings, west porch for evenings. The west porch, where the valley spread out below them, and the sky performed its nightly work in colors that, still after all this time, made Hector's chest ache in a way he had stopped trying to explain. He had watched these sunsets alone for 7 years. He was not watching this one alone. Wren had her book. She was reading but not reading. The way you hold a book when the sky is doing something extraordinary, and you don't want to miss it, but also don't want to put the book down because that would require admitting you've stopped reading. He looked at her reading the sky over the top of her book. She looked over, caught him. The light is doing something today, she said. It does this most evenings, he said. I know. She turned back to it. The gold moving across the valley floor, the shadow of the ridge drawing its long line east. I document it. In the notebook, the color changes. She paused. I'm running out of words for the specific gold. He looked at the gold. Cressida called it. The kept light, he said. The kept light, Wren said quietly. She said it was the light the day didn't want to let go of, he said. At the end. The last thing it holds on to. Wren was quiet for a moment. She was a poet, she said. She was a farmer's wife in Pennsylvania, he said. She just paid attention. Wren looked at the valley, at the kept light. I'm putting that in the book, she said. I know, he said. She wrote it in her notebook, right there, on the porch, while the light was doing it. While it was true and present and happening, the kept light. The last thing the day holds on to. He watched her write it. He watched the valley below holding all the light it could. And he thought, not for the first time, but with more clarity than before, that this was what the mountain had been waiting to hold. Not just him, not just the cabin, this. The 2 of them, and the mornings and the evenings, and the book about plants, and the reorganized shelves, and the arguments about dead philosophers, and the coffee cups, and the copper ring, and the east window, and all of it. The mountain had been waiting to hold a life. And they had given it one. Some stories end. This one does not end so much as continue, because that is the nature of things built rather than found. They keep being built, each day another small addition, another shelf, another page. Another morning sitting with someone who chose you and keeps choosing you in the small, unremarkable, essential ways that love actually works, not once. Not at the beginning every day. The kept light comes every evening. And every evening, someone has to be there to see it. For 7 years, Hector Vane had watched it alone. And it had been beautiful, and it had hurt. The way beauty always hurts, when it is witnessed by a single person who knows it should be shared. Now, it was shared, and the hurt became something else. Something that does not have a clean name in English. Something adjacent to gratitude. Something that lives in the chest and does not demand expression. Something that simply is, the way the mountain simply is. Permanent, patient, large enough to hold whatever you bring to it. He sat on the west porch of the cabin his mother had planned and he had built. He sat beside the woman who had followed something true across 1,000 miles without knowing entirely where it would lead. He watched the valley below doing what valleys do. He breathed the air of a mountain that had held his solitude for 7 years, and was now holding something better, something worth building toward, something worth staying for. The kept light stayed as long as it could. Then it went, and in the dark that followed, two lamb in the cabin on Black Ridge Mountain. One in the east room, one in the main room. The mountain noted this with the patient satisfaction of something that has been waiting a long time for a thing it knew was coming. Small lights against large dark, exactly enough.